let me read, to set this up, from a Washington Post piece tonight that I think explains the calculation behind what you hear President Trump saying there in terms of trying to pin this on Democrats. They say President Trump has calculated that he will gain political leverage in congressional negotiations by continuing to enforce a policy he claims to hate. The attempt to gain advantage from a practice the American Academy of Pediatrics describes as causing children irreparable harm sets up a high-stakes gambit for Trump, whose political career has long benefited from harsh rhetoric on immigration. So essentially, the Washington Post, they're saying the president sees this policy as leverage to get a deal from Democrats on immigration.
Right. The president obviously believes that Democrats are going to be more concerned about this particular policy, and that they are going to be willing to give up more to him to get him to change this policy if he keeps it in effect, if he continues to do things like plan for tent cities. I was on Capitol Hill today talking to conservative Republicans who said that their constituents don't like these policies of separating families. Both the president and Republicans in Congress know that this policy is unsustainable politically, which is why they're blaming Democrats for the policy that the president has put in place, and that the Attorney General has argued this week is a policy that essentially comes from God. I don't know if you saw Jeff Sessions' remarks about the Apostle Paul and the idea that laws should be obeyed because the people put in governance were put there by God. But a lot of the constituents of both Democratic and Republican members of Congress, some of them believe in separation of church and state, but others also believe in God that is compassionate and humane. What we are not seeing right now is compassion or humanity on the border.
Well, so, Franco, the White House is sending signals now that if the president sees this as leverage in trying to get something through on immigration, that the contours of what they're looking for includes the wall, it includes some limits, some restrictions on legal immigration, protection for families at the border, and then a path to legal status for the Dreamers. Politically, given this situation at the border, is there any sense among Democrats, any appetite among Democrats to go down that road towards compromise, or is that just a complete dead end to start with?
I mean, let's remember that back in January when they were talking about taking away DACA, the Democrats did jump all over, and they were ready to cut a deal. They were ready to pay for the wall. But the key issue here that you just mentioned is the legal immigration and slashing legal immigration in just a major percentile. I think that's where the line is going to be drawn with Democrats and many Republicans. They are very resistant to an overhaul of the tenets of the American immigration system, because that really would change the fabric of how we do immigration, focusing on family migration and taking care of making sure you keep families together. And I think that's also part of what you're seeing today, this week, with some of the concerns about separating children and families. It's always been a moral issue for the United States to keep families together, and there's concern about that. We're getting away from that.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.